Well, Dr. Patel, I know you spent a lot of time educating students and dentists early in their career about student loan debt. I know it's something you're passionate about. You spend a lot of time on campuses and talking about it. What opportunities are there for dentists to get help?
So we talked about, we do talk about public service loan forgiveness. And again, this is all today. This is January, July 25th. So things can change. But date stamp that. And right now, if you choose to work in what typically is called an underserved area, and that means different things depending on where you are. So right now, I'm sitting in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and there's places here in a city of 250,000 people that they call underserved. So the reason I'm saying this is because you need to pick one of these sites, pick a place. They're usually federally qualified health centers, freestanding community health centers, things like that that have dental departments. And essentially, what happens is that you give 10 years of your time. So you work for 10 years as a dentist. You continue to make those payments. So that's 120 payments over those 10 years on the federal student loan repayment program that you're on. And at the end of that 10 years, the balance is forgiven. So it's not a tax bomb. You don't owe anything on it. It gets forgiven. Obviously, the stipulation is that you're in one of those underserved areas, which there are kind of searches for available online, and that you're there for 10 years, and then you continue to make those payments on time. And like I said, at the end of it, it's forgiven. I do think that even with some of the staggering debt that we see, seven, $800,000, that it is still very possible to have a great life, do a lot of great work. I think dentistry is still one of the best small businesses out there. And quite honestly, in my experience, from what I've seen, one of the best ways to sort of handle all the debt, and it sounds a little counterintuitive, is to be a business owner, is to be a practice owner, right? And so, yes, you are going to front load maybe more debt that the note, right, for the practice or however you're choosing to pay for it, potentially the commercial mortgage for the building. So, for a lot of people that I speak to, it's like, oh my gosh, I've got $800,000 of student loans. I know I want to own a practice, but this is millions more dollars. That is before your improvements, you're buying the tech, you're investing into the practice. But truly, the best way to handle that really is to be a business owner, to be a practice owner. And we said it before, most lenders, and specifically Bank of America, like we talked about, our endorsed vendor, like to see some sort of cash reserves. I mean, I think it's good practice to have an emergency fund, right? Whatever that is, 3 months, 6 months. But they want to see that you have that cash sitting there because I think it was one of them that told me that dentists are pretty good. We repay our debt. We're pretty good on that, right? I think was it dentists and morticians or something? Those are the top two. Like we repay our debt regardless. And so banks don't look at that as a big negative as long as this practice is cash flowing, as long as you've got production reports that prove that you can do the same procedures as the practice is doing now. And you've got that savings.
Awesome. Thank you. Brett, did you have anything you wanted to add in here?
Yeah, I love that, Dr. Patel. I also am a huge advocate of entrepreneurship in dentistry. There was a recent data set that was published that showed that practice owners have the earnings potential to increase your earnings potential about 50% if you're a practice owner over just being an associate. So I see posts all the time of associates asking like, "Hey, I make $300,000 a year." They might be high earning associates,
Yep.
which is great, and they're asking, "Does it even make sense for me to own a practice?" Well, if you can make 300,000 as an associate, right, you can probably make $450,000 as a practice owner, right? If you can increase your earnings by 50% and have better tax write-off
Right.
abilities, better retirement plan vehicles, right? We really don't see taking on that additional layer of debt as debt because that practice will be your biggest asset. It's going to give you tax opportunities, earnings opportunities, autonomy. So it's just great to consider it that way as an asset, not really a debt when you're looking at practice acquisitions. The only other thing that I want to add to student loan, we mentioned student loan forgiveness. If you're going like the long-term student loan forgiveness route, know that would be tax. I mentioned it's going to be tax. It's going to be tax at your ordinary income rates. So what are your tax rates going to be in 30 years? Right? That's a long time out from now. We don't know what the tax rates will be. And then another thing is I get a lot of questions when people are trying to strategize on their debt payment. They're trying to minimize student loan payments. And I get asked a lot, like, should I file my tax return separately? I heard somewhere on a blog or something that I should consider that. Um, I work in California. Our client base is in California, and California is a community property state. And so if you're trying to figure out what all the buzz is about like filing separately and lowering your student loan payments, it doesn't always work in community property states. There's 9 community property states. And a community property state, if you're going to file separately, requires you to split your income if you're married 50-50, right? So if you have a tax return and you're married filing jointly and it's going to show $300,000 of income, right? On your married filing separate return, it would split that 50-50. It doesn't matter who makes the income, it will literally break that in half. So you would carve off half of your income, give it to your spouse would carve off half of your income and assign it to you on the tax return. And so really the only way that works in a community property state is if you have like a high earning doctor, non-working spouse, maybe there's a situation for that, but for the most part, it's not going to have a big impact on your student loan payments that you need to pay. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, in non-community property states, and I'm a New Yorker that's in South Dakota right now, but in non-community property states, really the only and very, very rare times I've seen this quote unquote work, as per what I've heard, and so my N is small, is when you're in a non-community property state, you've got one very high earner or one business owner and one that's not. And potentially, you're working for the business, some of the income is coming from your spouse, maybe you're working part-time and now your incomes aren't being split, but everything is, you're kind of still being put away and the bills are still being paid and your spouse is a business owner. Now, that's a very small fraction of people. That's not the rule. That's definitely the exception. I get asked by some students because the average age of the matriculant has risen so much that they've got, like a dentist spouse that's been a dentist for 20 years, right? That's established. And then their wife or their husband that's just graduated. And what do we do? Well, okay, if they can put away money for retirement and shelter whatever they need to shelter and run a bunch of expenses through the business legally and do all those things, and your bills are being paid and your life is being taken care of, and you want to work part-time, then you're in a non-community property state, then yeah, you're going to make really low payments, but you got to save for that tax bomb. And
That's
most
right.
people aren't good savers. Right.
Impulse.
Well, that's the thing, right?
Yeah.
$800,000 at a 37% tax rate is 250, whatever that is, that number. You've got to have that. And we don't know what the landscape is going to look like in that time of how they're going to ask for that payment.
Yeah. There's so many variables that go into that. And
Yeah.
I think the last thing I want to say on this topic is, when you get deep into the analysis of like what route is better, it's like you have to assume certain variables that aren't going to
Right.
change, right? And
Right.
so it is actually a difficult analysis to do because you don't know where your income is going to take you 15 years out from now. Your income could double, right? It could triple.
Right. Yeah.
And so I was just playing around for fun and I said, okay, well, what if we had a doctor who made $200,000 all the way through the career
Mhm.
consistently, right? And only had about 20% of income to work with. So that puts your monthly payment at around $3,500, or sorry, your monthly discretionary income. If we only have $3,500 to work with in between saving and paying off loans, like where should we put it? And I ran the scenario. What if that doctor, just accelerates debt, doesn't save anything for 10 years and has that debt paid off in 10 years, and then puts it all into savings for the next 20 years? Well, the difference was only an $18,000 net worth difference, assuming a 7% rate of return in the market and a 7% interest rate on the student loan. There's an $18,000 difference between doing that and accelerating debt payment versus not paying any, like paying the absolute minimum on the student loan and then paying it off over like a 20-year period of time. The gap got larger when you went the loan forgiveness route. And I ran the scenario of loan forgiveness happening after 30 years, minimum payment, 30 years, right? And putting all the rest into retirement. And the wealth gap was a $250,000 difference after 30 years in those two scenarios. And so, yeah, that's great, but that's assuming your income does not change, right? And so I almost would rather just focus on earning more, okay? And don't be tied to trying to keep your income low. Like that just doesn't make sense to me. Trying to keep your income low, trying not to, so your loans don't grow, your loan payments don't grow. And that way you can put extra money into savings. You can put extra money towards your debt payments. You can pay down that student loan. And in that scenario, it can be much, much better impact than a $250,000 impact. So does that make sense? We see that a lot as people are asking us like, hey, run these analysis for my situation. And almost every time I'm thinking, let's focus on the top line. What can you do to grow your career? How can you invest in yourself, right? And that's going to pay off more than all of these nuances of these other things.
Yeah,
Right.
it's like,
And that's that's also assuming that in 10 years you're not going to want to be a business owner, or you're not going to find a practice to purchase, or whatever, right? That's assuming a lot of things that you just have no control over. I never thought I was leaving New York. I mean, here I am in the middle of the country, right? Like you never know. And so I think you're exactly right. And also we're all, not all, many of us are notoriously poor savers. So to assume that you're going to have the discipline to put away now post-tax to pay that tax bomb in 25 or 30 years, right? So you're not just saving for everything else, you're also saving for that. And isn't it true, Brett, that if you go to like put it in a post-tax investment account and then you go take it all out to pay it, aren't you going to pay taxes on what you made over that 30 years in that account?
That's exactly right. So when we
Right.
looked at that analysis, we considered that the distribution to pay the tax bomb was going to include something like an extra $80,000 just to cover the taxes on liquidating the portfolio at that time. So it's something you do have to cover taxes on not only the taxes from the cancellation of debt, but also the taxes on liquidating assets in your portfolio that have grown over those 30 years.